there's more. There's even more. And that is because, guys, as you probably already know, and we have quite a bit to discuss in today's video, James Gunn responds to the fan reception of him and Peter Safran taking over DC Studios. Obviously, some people are supportive, but regardless, there's an overwhelming amount of comments, I guess you could say, or backlash, especially when the Henry Cavill news dropped, and he had a bit to say about that. But then, as he does, he responds to some fans on Twitter, and this is by far the most interesting part of this video, because one response in particular has got fans interpreting what he said about whether it's a soft reboot or a hard full reset reboot in two different ways. Is it that way or this way? And despite maybe you watching right now, yes, you thinking, no, it's obviously this, it can be interpreted both ways, so we are going to talk about that quite a bit. Now, on Instagram, he also responded with regards to Gal Gadot being booted, and also Ray Fisher calls out James Gunn. So, yeah. Let's go over today's DC News Roundup. Let's start with what he had to say about somewhat everything ever since he got the role as co-head of DC Studios. So, one of the things Pete and I were aware of when we took the job as heads of DC Studios was a certain minority of people online that could be, well, uproarious and unkind to say the least. Which, you know, I think is true, even if you haven't done that, or if another side of the fandom hasn't done that, there is a minority who will go ham, like literally ham, to the level of death threats and all kinds of things. Like, I don't think anyone could deny that. So James Gunn goes on to say, our choices for the DC universe, so our new DC cinematic universe coming our way, are based upon what we believe is best for the story and best for the DC characters who have been around for nearly 85 years. Perhaps these stories are great, perhaps not, but they are made with sincere hearts and integrity, and always with the story in mind. Now, my breakdown on this part of the thread is that I do believe him. Call me a shill or whatever. Like, I'm genuinely not, but just with no bias, just looking at it as objectively as I can, I would be hard-pressed to believe that David Zaslav hired James Gunn, and James Gunn has gone in with the mindset of like, oh yes, I'm going to destroy your universe. I'm going to do this because I want to piss each and every single one of you off. I don't think he has that intent. You may completely disagree with what he's done and has already done, for example, Cavill. You may disagree with what he's going to do in the future, as he acknowledges here. Perhaps these choices are great, perhaps not. But I do want to say that I do think he is going at this job with his best intentions. And James Gunn does love DC Comics characters. That is a fact, and he's demonstrated that many, many times. But going on, no one loves to be harassed or called names, but to be frank, we've been through significantly worse. Disrespectful outcry will never, ever affect our actions. We were aware there would be a period of turbulence when we took this gig, and we knew we would sometimes have to make difficult and not so obvious choices, especially in the wake of the fractious nature of what came before us. And I know I keep breaking down each part, but I think it's kind of important. I do agree with that. No matter what you thought of the DCEU, and as it actually currently stands, we've still got Flash, Aquaman 2, Shazam, Blue Beetle. All these movies are still coming out. James, you know, to anyone going to the conspiracy level of they're going to do a tax write-off of all of these movies, nope. James Gunn has replied to people saying, is Blue Beetle coming out? He's like, oh yes, like they're coming out. I don't think it can be denied that the old DCEU, whether you wanted it to continue on or not, and you don't want this soft reboot or hard reboot, it was still trying, you know, Humpty Dumpty's freaking wall came down, and it felt like they were trying to reconstruct it. No matter what way they were trying to reconstruct it, it wouldn't obviously please the Snyder fans who want a complete restoration of the Snyderverse. And then no matter what direction, some people may be happy with the way the bricks are being laid down, and some people may be in an in-between space. And even then, it felt like as the bricks were going up, some bricks would go back down again, because it's just like the Batgirl movie. Oh, we're going Batgirl, we're going Keaton as the new Batman for the next several years. Oh, Batgirl's canned. Oh, we're having a solo Keaton Batman. Oh, that's canned. So do you see what I mean? Brick? Oh, no, that brick crumbled. Somebody bring in the new brick. So I will say I agree with the fractious nature of what came before. James Gunn then goes on to say, but this means little to us in comparison to our jobs as artists and custodians in helping to create a wide and wonderful future for DC. see. I think this is one of those things, ultimately, with regards to what James Gunn has put out here, and before we move on to the interesting DCEU reboot or not kind of thing discussion, that is just going to have to show what crops are yielded when the crops have been produced. Weird analogy, but I think it makes sense. I know people will have a preconceived aspect of, no, these crops are going to be absolutely rotten, so whatever you yield is going to be BS and not as good as the previous farmer who was yielding these crops. And that's their prerogative if they really don't think that, but I truly don't think any side will know until we know, even if you had a preference for the direction. All right, so chapter 2 of this video, I suppose. The whole confusion of, is this a DC reboot or not? Now, let me preface this. He responded to the theory of, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, that so many people have been saying, okay, if it's not a hard reboot that's happening, then the soft reboot will be James Gunn is only keeping the Suicide Squad cast, right? He's only keeping characters like John Cena's Peacemaker, Jennifer Holland's Harcourt, which is James Gunn's wife, etc., etc. Those characters like maybe Margot Robbie, Amanda Waller, and everything like that. He is only keeping them and recasting everyone else, which I think people were going a bit towards, oh, it's a James Gunn and family and friends show. Everyone else, like Henry Cavill to whoever, you know, Shazam, or, you know, even the new Blue Beetle, everyone will be recast except the Suicide Squad. So let's get to the actual tweets. This user here said, who knows if it's true, but recasting all the main DCEU characters but keeping some will be interesting. How Peacemaker and Suicide Squad actors live on, but the others don't, particularly when they have all interacted together. James Gunn replies, I keep seeing posts with this untrue theory. We are not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad. It kind of makes your brain feel funny a little bit. Maybe not for some of you, might be like, isn't that clear? But truly think about it. Say it out loud to yourself. I keep seeing posts with this untrue theory. We're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad. That can be seen in two different ways, and if you're really not vibing with me right now in terms of what I mean, well, let me show you those two ways. So with James Gunn saying, and I know I keep repeating it, but I do need to really try and present this case. I keep seeing posts with this untrue theory. We're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad. The next step is to say, so what are you doing? A, recasting everyone? Is that what you mean by saying we're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad? Because, you know, the whole theory out there is saying, you know, you just got to recast everyone except your Suicide Squad characters like Peacemaker, Vigilante, Margot Robbie, Jennifer Holland, you know, your wife playing Harcourt. So we're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad is an untrue theory. So what are you doing? Recasting everyone. That's A. Now B, as Gunn says, not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad because there's also other DCEU characters in addition to the Suicide Squad that we're keeping in our new DC cinematic universe. So do you see what I mean there? I just want to repeat it one more time so people can truly see how there's another way. We're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad because we are actually not only keeping them, but also some unannounced and ambiguous for now legacy DCEU characters in our new DC cinematic universe in the future, albeit Henry Cavill isn't carrying on. That doesn't mean we're recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad, because there are a couple at least more DCEU characters that will be carrying on as well. So that's the thing. We don't know what he means. Whether you believe he's being deliberately vague, because I'm sure he's seen people like quote tweet this and everything saying, actually, you know, because initially I saw some people being quite definitive with it. And then a lot of people, even bigger influencers and everything, were going back on it being like, no, actually, it could be seen both ways. So I'm glad I don't feel crazy, because when I first read it in the stream, I was like, wait, am I just being silly right now? But does he mean this or this? And then I went to Twitter. Everyone is saying the same thing. Sure, you're getting people saying, no, it's clearly a reboot. But no, think about it again and again and again and tell me that you can truly definitively rule what James Gunn meant when he said that. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be a hard reboot. I'm not saying it's going to be a soft reboot. I'm just telling you that we're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad could mean, yeah, we're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad because that rumor's BS and we're actually resetting everything and recasting everyone. But we're also not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad. You could be saying that's untrue because it's not just those characters. It's because we're also keeping maybe this person, and this person, but he doesn't want to necessarily announce right now, especially who that's going to be. He may have a slate with, you know, character arcs and plans for movies, but that doesn't mean He knows for sure right this very second, if, let's just say there's another Wonder Woman movie, if Gal Gadot's going to be that casting for that role, or if it's going to be a new casting, because he could easily keep Gal Gadot, just like many people argue he could have kept Henry Cavill. Again, excuse the Marvel comparison, but Netflix's Charlie Cox Daredevil over to MCU style. Two completely different canon and continuities, yet can still carry on as a legacy casting going to a different universe. But either way, that might not even be the case. He could just keep Shazam. He could just keep Blue Beetle and Shazam and maybe one or two other characters. Or it could be the hard reboot. I'm just going around in circles now. But one thing I do want to add on top of this is it brings up the quote of what I said the other day. And a quote that comes to mind whenever I think about this DC universe full reset, full reboot versus soft reboot. And that is when James Gunn said, when he was first responding to all of this happening, like kind of the start of all this news with that Hollywood Reporter story. But in the end, and this is a bit further down the thread he put out, the drawbacks of that transitional period. So once again, kind of like today or yesterday, he was talking about that transitional period, the turbulence. But in the end, the drawbacks of that transitional period were dwarfed, dwarfed by the creative possibilities. And this is the most important part, and the opportunity to build upon what has worked in DC so far, and to help rectify what is not. So maybe you could use that as a piece of supporting evidence for how he's saying we're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad because it's not just them, we're also bringing some other characters, because that links to what he said a couple of weeks ago by saying, and the opportunity to build upon what has worked in DC so far, and to help rectify what is not. But that's when fans are going to also delve into the other side of that and say to James Gunn, are you saying Henry Cavill's Superman didn't work? Either way, given the fact that he's saying that theory is untrue, we're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad, meaning that he could have other characters as well, and then you combine that with this whole, the opportunity to build upon what has worked in DC so far, and to help rectify what is not. I mean, the way I see that when you say that out loud, it's just like, if he's building upon what has worked in DC so far, that means he's building upon what was already in the DCEU in his new universe. But again, that could be completely wrong. I could be collecting two pieces of circumstantial evidence together which seem to make sense, and it could still be a total hard reboot, because once again, I keep seeing posts with this untrue theory. We're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad because we're rebooting everything. I don't freaking know. But let's add one more thing into the mix here. And I don't think this truly supports the narrative of a soft reboot, because you could actually interpret this one in so many different ways. Over on Instagram, James Gunn replied to this, "Cannot wait to see what you're cooking up." That being said, the move to boot Cavill and Gadot, especially after they had announced their return, doesn't inspire confidence. James Gunn replied saying, "I'm not sure where you're getting that we booted Gal." Now, you could look at that in 2 or 3 different ways. Number one could mean that they didn't boot her and she could carry on in this new DC universe, again, Netflix, Daredevil, Charlie Cox style over to MCU. That could be what he meant by saying, I'm not sure where you're getting that we booted Gal from, right? But also, might totally not mean that. Could mean that as of Patty Jenkins' incarnation of the Wonder Woman 3 script that's dead, we haven't booted her, but we just don't know what we're doing with this character yet, so I don't know where you're getting that we booted Gal from. And then the next one could be that they didn't boot her, but that perhaps she's also decided to leave, and as a result, we're going to recast her so she, wasn't technically booted, or in a similar way to Henry, depends on how you view the word booted. Of course, you could totally say this is PR speak, and I fully understand that. James Gunn did say that they offered work for Henry Cavill in the DC universe ahead, in that future cinematic universe that is, and so in a similar way, Gunn doesn't view Gal as booted because they might plan to work with her again, even if she isn't the Wonder Woman character. So booted, again, I don't know, but there is one more story to talk about today, which is interesting, and that is that Ray Fisher called out James Gunn. So on Twitter, Ray Fisher says that the way James Gunn uses fake grace on Twitter is really funny. Him going to bat for Joss Whedon, pseudo-apologizing for it, and then deleting it immediately before taking his new DC job is not. Refusing to apologize for toxic behavior seems to be a job requirement for for Warner Brothers and DC. Now, what's interesting about this, and that was quite a slam from Ray Fisher, you know, he's quite literally saying that James Gunn uses fake grace on Twitter, and that's really funny to him. He went to bat for Joss Whedon with those tweets from ages ago, but then he kind of pseudo-apologized, according to Ray Fisher, for it. As you can see in the tweet, James Gunn did respond to Ray Fisher at the time, but now it's deleted, thus saying that it's like this fake grace and, you know, refusing to apologize for this toxic behavior. A lot of fans, as a result, have come to Gunn's defense here, and I've been looking at like every perspective here. So various fans are saying that Ray Fisher calling out Gunn at a time of when James Gunn is responding to Backlash on his new role as, you know, co-head of DC Studios is just kind of inviting further backlash at a time of that existing backlash that James Gunn felt compelled to address, and how that isn't a great look for Ray Fisher. But that's not only the perspective that's floating out there. A lot of people are also saying that he's calling out James Gunn for something that isn't technically true in a way, that Ray Fisher perhaps perceived it at the time of calling James Gunn out and posting that tweet. And this is because James Gunn has this auto-delete tweet feature enabled. And what is that essentially? To those of you who might not use Twitter so much, you can actually sign up to these bot kind of things, and it will periodically delete your tweet history every X amount of time. And James Gunn has that enabled. So therefore, with Ray Fisher's tweet, when you now look at it in this new perspective, yeah, technically James Gunn didn't deliberately go back and single out his response and apology to Ray Fisher from way back then and delete it, because it got auto-deleted. Which is why James Gunn directly replied to Ray Fisher saying, "All my tweets automatically delete every few months, Ray. It has nothing to do with my tweets to you." Thus, making Ray Fisher's comments on, you know, him going to bat for Joss Whedon, pseudo-apologizing for it, and then deleting it immediately before taking his new DC job, it is not specifically true to what he was claiming. Which, from where I'm standing, seems to be like a, you know, point A, logical journey through that to finish. Like, that makes sense. But here's the other side, and this is the interesting thing. Then you have a lot of fans saying, well, okay, even if this is the case, which it does appear to be, James Gunn didn't deliberately, you know, go back and delete his tweet, you know, before taking the job of head of DC Studios. Even if that is the case, which it does seem to be, many fans are now saying, yeah, but why does James Gunn have this tweet delete feature enabled? And I think we all probably know why. It is an interesting thing if Ray Fisher actually responds to James Gunn saying, why do you feel the need to do that? Because it will dig up quite a few skeletons from his closet. Now, many fans are being like, well, isn't it obvious why he has this tweet delete feature enabled? Because, you know, there was those extremely dark tweets in the past, so dark to the point of where obviously Disney fired him from Guardians of the Galaxy for tweets that are 13 years old, and perhaps he has that feature enabled just in case. Obviously he's not making those same jokes in present day to what he made way back then, but just in case things can ever, through some whatever he tweets, be interpreted in a way where it damages his career. And not to mention, you know, Disney themselves rehired James Gunn, which is interesting. So you know, it is a bit of a weird thing, you know, even from my perspective here, because if he responds to Ray Fisher, if Ray Fisher's like, so why do you have those tweets enabled? Sure, there's the easy response of, this has happened to me before for jokes I made 13 years ago, extremely like sketchy ones, these parties, and you know, if you know, again, YouTube ad guidelines, can't really get so much into detail about that. I feel like he would have to talk about that and acknowledge that again, and people saying, oh, so why do you know this person? Why were you hanging around with that person? And I just don't see that cupboard being open, so to speak. I think if there is any kind of response, it'll just be like, well, I've been fired from Disney before, got rehired, and now I'm the head of DC Studios. But just in case anything blows up again that I might have said, I have it on auto-delete. But either way, I think one thing, even though this kind of evolved into something else about why James Gunn has an auto-delete feature on his Twitter, technically the original thing from Ray Fisher, I assume, is an incorrect claim. Just if you kind of look at it on a logical basis, because if that's true about James Gunn's auto-delete thing, and I don't get why he'd lie about that, then I assume that Ray's now got to understand that he didn't go back before taking this job and deliberately deleted this tweet to Ray Fisher, you know, kind of apologizing at the time, or whatever that tweet was. That just didn't happen the way Ray Fisher claimed it. in yesterday's tweet. By the way, let me know what you think about that situation with Ray Fisher calling out James Gunn and just this whole situation in general. What do you think of James Gunn acknowledging the backlash, but also saying, you know, we're ignoring that, it would never impact our decisions and actions on the characters, and it's all coming from a sincere place for love for these characters and the story that is going to unfold in the future. But most importantly, I would say, what do you think about his reply saying, I keep seeing posts with this untrue theory, we're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad. Is that because we're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad because we're rebooting everything, or we're not recasting everyone except the Suicide Squad like you all keep saying because we're actually keeping this character as well as that character as well as the Suicide Squad? Let me know. Let me know. It's going to be really interesting to see everyone's takes. Like this video if you did enjoy it. Please consider subscribing if you want to stay up to date on all kinds of news, breakdowns, reviews, and everything coming your way in the future, which is going to be some good stuff, I bet. And yeah, I think that's everything. Follow me on Twitter. All the kind of links are in the description down below. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Kind of losing my words right now. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.